Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Progress City Radio Hour. I am Jeff Crawford, joined by my brother, Michael Crawford. Michael, how's it going this week?
It's going great. Really excited to hear the rest of our town hall interview for this month.
I know, like I said, first of all, if you haven't listened to part one, you should. So go check that out in your feed. Even before that, we've been lucky enough to have Tom on all 4 of these Fantasyland episodes. But like I said in the last episode, these are some things that Tom's about to talk about that I had no idea about the genesis of. And Tom was involved in a lot of the projects in the later part of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, big parks, and an interesting time for the Walt Disney Company. So we get some insight into that.
Yeah, you make a good point. These were projects that I knew next to nothing about how they got off the ground. I feel like there's a period in the 80s and early 90s where Disney was super wide open about the creation of everything from Epcot to Disney MGM Studios to Paris. And they really threw open the doors and very widely publicized the process of what was going on. Then things got a little more quiet. Things got a little more secretive. And so things like Disney Studios Paris or Hong Kong, you never really heard about what was going on and how that came to be. So it's really exciting to be able to document some of that.
So without further ado, here is Tom.
We talked about Paris and that Fantasyland previously on our last time out, but you also did some preliminary work on the second gate for Paris. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Another interesting time in the company that for me was more perilous than the Michael Eisner coming on board in 1984, or the raid, the Saul Steinberg raid, and all of that was perilous. And then Michael and Frank came and things got better. But then after Disneyland Paris opened, things got perilous again, because Disneyland Paris was not an immediate success. And there was even talk of it possibly closing. And as far as Peter Rummel and other people high up in the organization were concerned, we were finished with theme parks. I heard a couple of times, the market is saturated. The world market is saturated for theme parks. Putting any money back into Disneyland Paris is chasing good money after bad, all these things. And so I was put on DisneyQuest, and DisneyQuest was, going to be part of a program of all sorts of different kind of regional entertainment things that were going to take the place of theme parks and rescue, the company, rescue Imagineering. And so I was on DisneyQuest, but at the same time, I was still doing not closeout, but post Disneyland Paris Magic Kingdom, the added attractions, added capacity, and then they were changing restaurants around, changing merchandise locations into restaurants into merchandise locations, all of the kind of things that happen in the first 3 or 4 years after a park opens, as they adjust things. And as I was out there on continuous, it seemed like, business trips, I got the notion that, it was just my opinion that if they can't do a second park, because by then now the Euro Disneyland MGM Studios had been shut down. That was to have opened, I think, like around 1997 or 96 or 97. And they had been working on it up through 93 or 94, and then it was just shut down. And then it's like, we are never building a second park. I mean, it was just plain and simple. I mean, maybe in 30 or 40 years, but not any time, not in our lifetime. I heard that a lot too. Will there ever do that? It's like, okay, but there needs to be more things to do. I mean, if you want to increase length of stay, you have to have more things to do. So I started working on an idea for just a big animation attraction that would be like a half, that would be like a water park, but they didn't want to do a water park, right? But this would be like the water park thing that you would spend 2.5 or 3 hours at, and you wouldn't spend a full day's admission. You'd spend, half the price or whatever. And so water park budget, water park ticket price, water park length of stay kind of a thing. But all indoors, and it's all celebrating animation, because one thing I picked up when I was out there is that, the French love animation. They love film and they love animation. And just about any day of the week in Paris, you can go to any Disney classic animated film will be showing in some theater somewhere in Paris, because they have so many of these idiosyncratic theaters there that are, that show retro, films. So it seemed like there was some kind of market out there that could increase length of stay and also reach out a little bit to the local Parisians. If you had regular animation festivals and showcases, plus they had the Montreuil studio already established. Disney had opened and was operating their own animation studio just east of the city of Paris, in between Paris and Disneyland Paris. That was the Montreuil studio, and they were working on parts of Fantasia, and they were working on, I'm trying to remember now, I think they worked on maybe parts of Roger Rabbit, and then I think they did pick up on a lot of the other different films, but it was a full-fledged animation studio. Mm-hmm. So why not move it out to Disneyland, where people can see it and look into it like they were doing, because it was still very popular at Disney MGM Studios in Florida. So basically do that in an even bigger way, so that you're in this, whole world of animation, kind of like the animation pavilion that ended up at Disney's California Adventure, but even bigger, with more things to do in it. On a drizzly gray day in the winter, you could go out there and have a lot of fun, and it would be very bright and very colorful. And you could also a great stop for schools, school field trips, educational. And the Disneyland Paris management really liked that idea. They seemed to, at first there was like, no. And then they began to, they were realizing this whole length of stay thing required more to be out there. And so what was a cost-effective way of getting some other kind of attraction out there? All they needed to do was increase the length of stay from 1 day to 2 days, or 1.5 days to 3 days. I can't remember. There was some metric that was like, it shouldn't be too hard to do. Of course, I'm taking it like easier than it really was. But so I started working on this idea. I got a little budget to do it. Nina Vaughn and some other people did some renderings of it, and it started to gather interest. And then, like so many half-day sorts of things do, it starts to grow and it starts to grow. And, I wish we had just said, stop. Do animation and see how that does. And if it's popular, then you could go into live action film and have another piece of it. But this whole thing, no, we have to have gates, and the gates have to be full priced. So, whoa.
Yeah, dark times.
So that was a messy thing that I then got involved with. All of it. I mean, we did our best, but the budget was the budget, and we were building a theme park when they said they were not going to build any more theme parks. And there were all sorts of other annoyances that got us where to, but a lot, I think what was there was good. There just was hardly anything there.
Were you with that all the way through?
Up until about 2000, and then Paul Osterhout took over as I moved on to Hong Kong. So I wasn't there to do like installation or art direction or any of that, but I did make occasional trips out there. But the budget was the budget, and we couldn't build in the middle of it because there was some statutory thing with the government and some established building thing that had to be resolved and couldn't be resolved, until the year 2000, whatever, 2010 or something. So you couldn't build in the middle of it. So we were building along this ridiculous boomerang shape.
Yeah.
But I think Cinemagique came out. I mean, the things that were there were pretty good. The animation pavilion was good, although I would have liked to have more stuff in it. Cinemagique came out great, and the stunt show was spectacular. And we got Rock and Roller Coaster in there, and the tram tour for a while. I thought we should have done to the tram tour what Universal does with their tram tour and keep adding to it. So there's always something. Every year there's a new crazy pearl along the necklace of things on that tram route. But I don't know how much of that they did. I know they didn't do anything for the first 5 or 6 years. So it was, for me, it was frustrating because I had a lot of ideas and the team I was working with had a lot of ideas, but we were always kind of, hemmed in by budget or differences of opinion about what should be there.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine it was incredibly frustrating because even from the outside, people, those of us who were following everything at the time, it was a dark time. So I would imagine being on the inside would have been very frustrating. And
yeah, it was a fun project researching. I mean, we went to every film studio, it seems like, in Western Europe and in Berlin. In fact, there were 3, I think, in Berlin that we went to, at least 2. One of them was a very, very historic film studio, Babelsberg. And there were just, all sorts of wonderful ideas we came up with. Sometimes you see things that are lamish, but you think, if they had only done this and added that, it would taken it out of lamishness and, turned it into something extraordinary or magical. But it was just, it was frustrating.
So you mentioned that you worked on DisneyQuest.
Yes.
And I did not know that. And that is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. And it should be something I don't know really anything about the process behind that. So, what can you tell us about that?
Well, I started working on that. Let me think when that would have been, 95, probably. Joe D'Annunzio was a newly appointed vice president of development, I think. And he was put there in place. I think Joe was with strategic planning, if I'm not mistaken, over at the studio, but really preferred kind of the WED Imagineering vibe, and was selected to be kind of the a business developer for new projects. And this was during the era of, we're not going to do any more theme parks. We're finished with that. But we will consider doing, and this is an Imagineering saying that. This is kind of an arm of the corporate company saying that. But we'd like to look into these regional entertainment opportunities. And at that time, that meant like, what's that? Well, that's a thing like, Dave and Buster's, but better. That was really the only, analog out there, I think, at the time. Although there were some other projects in the works, like Sony and, Sony's big, I forgot what it's called, but it eventually ended up in San Francisco. And I think they had a version of it in Berlin. But these were, regional entertainment opportunities to bring a little bit of Disney to your town, but not a theme park, but something else. So ESPN began to be developed. But Joe was really interested. I think someone else took on the responsibility of ESPN. But Joe and I worked on this idea for a Disney theme park in a box, but leveraging off of gaming and video games. And I believe it all came about possibly because it was either Nintendo or Sega was interested in a partnership. So it would be leveraged, with a big player.
Oh, yeah.
And so the idea is that it would premiere at Walt Disney World, but then eventually go on to major cities in the country and then major cities around the world. And
That's amazing.
Yeah. And what was kind of funny about it was that I had been really into video games when they first came out. This is at the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. And so I had become like, a jock at a couple of the games. Battlezone, if you remember that one.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I was so good at that. And Galaga,
yeah.
Galaga, and Targ. I wasn't so good at Targ, but I was addicted to it. But Battlezone was really the one I got really good at. Beating a lot of the scores wherever I went, whatever machine I went to. And then when I started getting involved, let's see, it must have been after Epcot. Then I guess I just, stopped. It was funny because they had video games in the bowling alley next to Imagineering, and we'd go in there during our breaks back in the day, when we took breaks at 10 and 3. But once Epcot was open, I was so busy, I never had time anymore for breaks. So I stopped playing video games at that time. And so I had kind of lost touch with the whole video game world. So I thought it was kind of an interesting selection that they selected me to work on this. But then again, there wasn't anyone else that was any more experienced with them in the building at the time, except Joe. Joe's younger than I was. So we just started thinking about what we could do. And we took a trip, and I was working with Jan Circus on this at the time, who was one of the creative vice presidents. I just, started thinking, and Jan and I just started thinking about what kinds of cool places, how can we take this thing but make it into a cool kind of a place? Because that's what it's going to be at the end of the day, is a place that you want to return to. That's always what it is.
Right.
It doesn't, it could have the most amazing technology in the world, but if it isn't a place that you feel comfortable going to, and remember, most arcades were not comfortable places.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you were 13 years old.
Well, I think it probably benefited the project, you not knowing what was possible, because it was way ahead of its time. Like I remember going the first time, and, as someone who had been raised in arcades, and it was pretty mind-blowing experience just from the moment you went in, the elevator ride up to wherever you went in.
Right.
It was a pretty remarkable technical achievement for the time.
Yeah. So I was doing that concurrent with still following up on Disneyland Paris post-opening attractions and changes and modifications and that sort of thing. And we were finishing up the added capacity program. So I benefited a little bit by being able to benchmark, if you will, whatever interesting kinds of new places were sprouting up in Paris and London and other big cities in Europe. And they were actually in the process of still building it, but someone gave me a tour of it while it was in process. Was a huge arcade in just off of Piccadilly Circus in London. Can't remember even what it was called, but it was like 5 or 6 stories, and it had a big escalator that went up through the middle of it. It was kind of open air, and you would go past the different levels, and but it wasn't really creatively. There were some neat little effects in it and some neat little kind of show busy things, but there wasn't an attempt to create kind of an organizing principle behind it, or go much further than a typical arcade, other than you could tell they were spending more money on lighting and materials and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And it didn't, it felt a little more comfortable as a place to go into. It didn't feel like, like a typical arcade. So, so we had that to kind of benchmark with, and there was also a similar thing in Paris. I can't even remember. I'd have to go back through my notes and everything to see where this was, but they were building something similar. Oh, the one in London was called Trocadero, I think, or it was part of the Trocadero complex. But and then we decided that we would go to Japan to see the installations or the facilities that Sega had created called Joypolis. There were, I think, 2 of those, and then there might have been another one. I think this might have been, I remember taking 2 trips to Japan. So the first one might have just been to see Joypolis and talk to the people at Sega. And so I think that first trip may have just been Joe D'Annunzio and myself, and going through Joypolis and writing everything and experiencing everything. Writing meaning there were a couple of games that were set up on rides. So if you remember the Astro Blasters at DisneyQuest with the basketballs, would shoot at one another. It was a takeoff on this attraction that was similar to that. It was a bumper car that was enclosed with plexiglass, and it scooped up tennis balls on the floor, and you shot the tennis ball, and they were fluorescent, I think. And it was lit by black light. So you went into this dark space and you shot out these tennis balls at people. And then the plexiglass paneling on the sides was encrypted or somehow, smart. So it knew kind of, it was able to score, it was able to create scores based on that. So, we liked that idea. We knew it was kind of a technology that we could start with and not completely invent. And and then there were some other interesting things, including the most popular thing there seemed to be a horoscope attraction, where it was a theater show. Kind of think Future Choice Theater.
Yeah.
Future Choice Theater. And because I believe there was some kind of interface at the chairs, and I think they would ask you questions that were kind of Myers-Briggs style questions. And then they would probably select certain seats to do a thing where here's your, ideal boyfriend. This was something that was really popular with the women who had the extra time on the weekdays to go there, because that was a big thing that like office girls and office secretaries there would do on their lunches, breaks, or after work. And then it was big, of course, on the weekends. So this was really big, but it was popular with the guys too, but especially popular with the women. And it didn't involve any kind of, hand-eye coordination or, video game skills. And so we found that to be very interesting, and interesting in how popular it was. And you also got a horoscope at the end of the attraction, a takeaway with it. And there were some other, there was some sort of a simulator scoring thing. And so anyway, we found all that interesting, and we met with some people at Sega briefly, and then came back and then started in earnest. And I think that's maybe when Jan came on board, and then after Jan was Larry Gertz, and then Joe Garlington. So now this is a design process that went on for 2 or 3 years and was incredibly comedic and frustrating at the same time, because this was when very senior management was going through some growing pains. One was with the loss of Frank Wells. And so the ship was not as steady as it was. And so there was a division called strategic planning, and people hated strategic planning because they were the bad guys, right? They're the money MBAs from Harvard and all of this, but I got along decently with them. But there were some crazy notions that would run through that. One of the things that I was very passionate about was that this be zoned like Disneyland, but we can make it completely different. We don't have to follow the old rules. We can be inspired by the old rules. So let's not make the zones based on geography or time. Let's make them based on psychographic, I guess, psychographics, like I was saying, let's make them verbs, not nouns, which later became a big deal. But it had not been done at that point. And so people meaning management tended to either be really scared or really excited about that. But what the new people weren't excited about was nostalgia. And one of the zones was based on video games of the past, of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right. And even some carnival stuff, from the 50s and 60s, so that there could be a pinball section or something based on pinballs anyway. And, you'd have Pong and Atari, but you do reinvent them in different ways. So it's the old thing, but, done on a wall, instead of on a little monitor. And then it was also simply bringing back, some of the great games from that era, but really kind of inventing some new, like a new way to do whack-a-mole. And so right. I had the notion of this is like an arcade on Mars. Imagine if there's a carnival or an arcade or a games of skill, setup, but it's on another planet with aliens. Because Toy Story had just come out, so that was like another opportunity to fold that into this area. And boy, we had fights about that because we were bringing back something old instead of new. It's like, but most of this is new. It's something old that's brought back in a new way. And it finally took Marty, to kind of remind them and tell them the story that I guess he went through with General Electric when they were all done with writing and programming and doing that show. And they showed it to some high executive at GE before it was ready to be shipped to New York. And the executive said, well, this is all about the past. And we want to sell our current, dishwashers and toaster ovens and refrigerators, etc.
Yeah.
And I guess Walt Disney, put him in his place and said, listen, I've spent, my whole career in the past and the present and in the future and blah, blah, blah. And I know the audience and I know what it's going to like. So if you don't like the show, you can whatever Walt would say after that. Well, Marty retold that story, and for the time being, it made them comfortable. It ended up being, what I always heard was it was the most popular space I don't know if it's the most popular attraction, but it was the space that people spent the most time in. And anyway, so that was just one of many battles, because we were tasked to do something entirely new. Yet when we would propose something entirely new, there was, and I'm talking about people not at Imagineering, but people at the studio at the time, who were supposed to be the adults in the room, and they would, say, well, then they'd fall back to, well, wasn't that tried 20 years ago and it didn't work? Didn't we need to know, we need to be comfortable knowing that people are going to do this thing, and if it hasn't ever been done before, how do we know that? Okay. So you go back and forth, and you show them something that's been done before. And it's like, well, this has been done before. Oh my God. This was like the first project I worked on that was like that, where you go back and forth and back and forth. And this, was a challenging time in the company. So it took 2 or 3 years to sell this idea finally to the board of directors, and to treat, I can't even say it, strategic planning. They were the people that kind of, green lighted things. I mean, ultimately it was Michael and Frank and then Michael. and briefly Michael and Mike. And for a little while, it was Michael and Litvak. What was his first name? Litvak.
Stanley?
Stanley Litvak. So for a while there, it was actually Michael and Stanley. They were kind of the final green or red lights, but they're looking at the red or green light that strategic planning has created. So this just took a long time. And I remember on one of the middle iterations of this, so this is now 96 or 97. And also, I think, I'm trying to remember, then Jan Circus left that project, and it was Larry Gertz and Joe Garlington. So I was then working with them. And gosh, I'm just trying to remember all of the convolutions. But one of the funniest convolutions was that we had created an idea, sample boards, or what do you call them? Style boards, to give a sense of, that not only are there new things in here, but I mean, stylistically, it's different too. It's not like anything that Disney had yet done. And if you remember the 90s, there was, I don't even know what the name of this movement was. It wasn't postmodern, or maybe it was a subdivision of postmodern, or, it wasn't Memphis. It was beyond that. That was earlier. But when everything, instead of being a straight line, it's a crooked line, and instead of being, it was plump, or, and it was fun, it was different. And I remember the Contemporary Hotel had brought in a little bit of this flavor, and some of it was starting to creep in from places that were niche-y to more mainstream. And I liked a lot of it. It was just fun, and it had motion, a handrail that, things were zigzaggy or sine wavy, and not straight anymore, and different materials, and sometimes used materials done in a new way, or new materials done in an old way, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just throwing all this stuff out. And it was Peter Rummel who looked at these boards and went, this is, I appreciate that you guys are trying to do something new, but this stuff is really niche-y. This is something, you're going for the 5%, not the 95%. This is something that you guys like, I'm assuming, but this isn't our guest at Walt Disney World. And some of those pictures were the Contemporary Hotel.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, man.
And some of them, were South Coast Plaza, and, very
Too
mainstream
niche. Too niche
places. Yeah. And that meeting went off the rails, I remember. And so then there was another one, the kind of the last chance, the third at the bat. And we sold it. We sold it then.
Wow.
And we had that by this time. We had created the zones, the elevator idea, and because Joe Garlington knew his stuff, we had viable attractions that were new and innovative, but doable. Because God knows, we also had, we brought in a lot of outside thinkers and new thinkers, but they didn't have, practical knowledge of. First of all, there's the technical practicality, but second, there's how is the guest really going to interface with this? And that's where Joe Garlington really excelled, because he knew and had, was a studier of guest behavior. After all these years at Epcot, he did not design the first round of interactive games at Epcot. Those were all done by different organizations, and then he saw how people really responded to them and learned from that. And so I think thanks to him, it really suddenly became a very viable proposition. With specifically, we had 10 or 12 sort of marquee attractions, including I had come up with a design and ride your own coaster.
Yeah.
That was wild.
That was really mind blowing.
It was so wild that I only rode it a couple times.
You had to be careful.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, so we had a simulator game in the score area, and we had, that kind of pinballish machine, with the big screen and the motion base stations.
Oh, right.
I'm forgetting the names of all these things. I'm going to have to go back and do my homework because it's been a long time. And the little thing with the remote controlled Jeeps.
That was fun.
Yeah, I forgot about that one. Under the floor.
Yeah. And I think once we got there to that point, then I moved on to the next thing, and they finished the project up. And so that was that.
That was such a fun
3 or 4 crazy years of trying to sell something, and sometimes going around in circles.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there were things there that you couldn't do. I always felt the roller coaster was a natural descendant of Computer Coaster at Epcot, but for real, you could really, really do it. Yeah. And I remember the lightsaber thing, the lightsaber game. That was a lot of fun. And
and the pirates, the pirate cannon thing, which was something else before.
Oh, that was so cool. The Hercules one was great too. Yeah.
Yeah, the alien encounter tie-in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then I had done some proposals for the building, but they didn't buy those. I was a little disappointed because I felt that there was a premise there of, theme park in a box. You're going into and the building is the berm, but they were also missing an opportunity to make the building active and kinetic.
Yeah.
And to relay at a glance what's inside without having to explain it, which is kind of a basic tenet of design.
Right.
Any design. And there were some folks that I battled with a little bit because they became entrenched with this idea. And it was Joe and I who had come up with this idea of a theme park in a box, and the building's the berm. But then the next group was like, okay, they just like bought it like, born again. And they wouldn't let go. I'm like, okay, but it would be cool to have something else, outside that you can see, or, some porousness so that you can, or some translucency to it. And no, you said theme park in a box, and then that's what it's going to be. And I was very disappointed with the building. And I saw that being designed, and I came up with some counter proposals for it and built a model and everything. And by then they had established the budget, and so it was a no-go for that.
Yeah.
So the idea was that it was then going to open in Chicago, which it did, and from Chicago go to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, I think, and then San Francisco. It's funny, there's a San Francisco kind of connection to how DisneyQuest ended up being laid out physically, which was there was an old store. I have relatives up there. So while I was up there early on, I had caught wind of the fact that an old venerable department store called the Emporium was closing after 100 years or whatever it was. And it was this old building on Market Street, I guess, near Union Square. And it was a 5-story building, I believe. And it had a big open center to it, big open core. And it was very cool going up the escalators because you could kind of, see by going up the escalators where everything was. Mm-hmm. And it just had a nice feel to it. It felt exciting when you walked in the middle of it, because you looked down and you looked up. And then they did like a Christmas park on the roof every Christmas time. They had like and so I told Joe, I said, you know, he had reasons to go up there several times. So I said, check out this Emporium place. And I think he did. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of like, that's how we should maybe think about laying this thing out. And it is how we ended up laying it out. It was the big open core in the center.
Yeah.
5 stories. And, but you couldn't look in. It was disappointing. You know, they blocked it off. They were taking this berming idea way too seriously. You know, like, we're going to go up in the treehouse, and then we're going to put a big tent around it so that you can't see the Matterhorn or the castle because you're in Adventureland.
Right. Yeah. It's very inward facing for sure.
Yeah. So I wished I had stayed on maybe a little bit longer to influence that. But, and then Tom Gillian did that beautiful rendering of what the center of it would, before the term steampunk had become coined. We had kind of that armillary sphere.
Oh, yeah.
In the center of it. And so that's DisneyQuest. And then I went there shortly after opening. I think by that time they almost forgot I had worked on it. I had to call Joe D'Annunzio and have him call the manager so I could get in. Yeah. I think I missed the opening because I was probably doing something in Europe or something at the time. So it's one of those kind of melancholy situations, you know, where at the end, you know, you're forgotten. Well, that's an occupational hazard in this business.
Yeah, truly. Yeah. The forgotten men of Imagineering. Well, you go from this period of we're not going to build any more theme parks to building one in Hong Kong. And you were obviously heavily involved with that. How did your role in that emerge? And, you know, how did that project emerge from this period of, you know, we're done?
Well, it emerged from being location-based entertainment, or we called them LBEs, and then they became RD&Es, I guess. So the idea was, you know, some other team had worked on an idea, and I think Joe Lynn Cicero was involved. And it was, you know, is there some kind of entertainment in a tent, in a cool tent, you know, that can be brought or travel around to different cities. And so they tried it out in Phoenix, and I think it was a big success. I can't remember the name for the life of me.
Oh, weird.
What this thing was. It opened in Phoenix. We went and saw it. And right after it opened in Phoenix, they wanted to try it in Hong Kong. I think I've got the story straight here. Again, my attention was elsewhere at the time.
Yeah.
But I know that Joe was working on this project, and I'm pretty certain it did actually open in Hong Kong, and it was very successful. And from that, they thought, well, we should think about doing a permanent LBE in Hong Kong. And then I think just from there, it's just kept growing. I think the opportunity, there was some, you know, at the time, Universal was sniffing around Southeast Asia. So this could have been some kind of a thing where, okay, Universal, if you're going to do something here, we're going to do something there. Yeah. And so there was some kind of shifting around of looking at locations like Singapore and Shanghai. And, you know, ever since Frank Wells came on board, he had wanted to look at China, Beijing or Shanghai. And so that was still kind of out there, even though we weren't going to build any more theme parks. Maybe we would do this one more in a country with 7 billion people or whatever it is. Well, it's not 7 billion, but it's a lot. And so that was happening. And so Universal and Disney are sniffing around, and somehow, I guess they, you know, some team started working on a small park for Hong Kong, or maybe it could go in Singapore. But at some point, discussions began with the Hong Kong government, and it became kind of a more and more attractive proposition. But it was still a small park. But it had grown to, I would say, a half a day park.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because I was working on what I thought should be a half a day park for Paris, that they were saying, okay, it is a half a day park, but we're going to call it a full day park. And in Hong Kong, they're working on something that they want to call a half a day park. And I wasn't paying any attention to this park. I had my own half a day park to deal with. And around 2000, I think it was 2000, yeah, Marty asked me to go to Hong Kong with Wing Chow because they're going to have a meeting with the Hong Kong government about this project, which had, was in the process of being developed. And I knew nothing about the project. I knew nothing about Hong Kong. I knew nothing about the Hong Kong government, any of that stuff. And I'm on a plane, heading out there a little bit with some trepidation because I didn't know anything about Hong Kong. So I guess my exposure to Hong Kong was like, the man with the golden gun and
Right.
things like that made it always seem like it was kind of a dodgy place. But it was wonderful. It was, I couldn't believe it when I got there, the hotel. And it was, just imagine a clean, high-tech, futuristic city. And it's attached basically to a jungle,
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
With monkeys. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating that. There were monkeys in the zoo, and there may have been some monkeys that escaped the zoo. I seem to recall monkeys, but and there was a little kind of aviary behind the hotel. Well, I fell in love with Hong Kong, and it's like, this is a project I'd like to work on. But when I got back after that project, back to the States to kind of get in the middle of it, it was like, oh no, this is another one of those. Why isn't it bigger? Okay, we'll make it bigger. How come it's so big? Okay, we'll make it smaller. Why is it so small?
Yeah.
How come it's not Chinese? Okay, we'll put some Chinese into it. Why is there Chinese here? The Chinese aren't coming to see Chinese. Okay, we'll take the Chinese out. You need some kind of a nod to the Chinese culture. Okay, we'll put something in. Take that out. Why is that there? It's Chinese. Oh my God, we don't want anything old in this Disneyland park. Well, Disneyland has old things in it. Well, we don't want old things. Okay. So this was a park that had Adventureland, Fantasyland. I think it had Tomorrowland, and a sad excuse for a Main Street. 2 blocks. Like no City Hall, no opera, and then only 2 of the 4 blocks.
Oh, wow.
And then Fantasyland it had been, and I wasn't the one who changed it, but it had been proposed as in the style of It's a Small World, to be something completely different. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. But by the time I had gotten it, someone had decided, I think it was Pressler, that no, it's got to be a castle park, but it can't be an expensive castle. It's got to be the Disneyland castle that everyone loves. And I like the Disneyland castle. So, I could buy into that. It really should be its own unique castle, but in my opinion, but I was the latecomer to the table and was trying not to make too many waves.
Right.
And, and I understood what the challenges were and what the attendance projections were. And so, and I was working alongside of a very good guy named John DeSantis, who was one of the most supportive producers that I ever worked with. And he had worked a lot on the Disney Studio Tour in Florida, and opened up the El Capitan and the other one down the street. Oh my God. The brain. It'll just pop into my head in a minute. And he had also done the new theaters for the Disney theatrical group, the theaters that they were building
Oh yeah.
around the world to have Beauty and the Beast and then Lion King and stuff like that. And so we worked to get this park, because they said we're now going to call it Disneyland, because it was being called Disney's Magical Experience or Disney's Magical Asian Park or something that was generic, that wasn't Disneyland. And they said, we're not going to call it Disneyland. It has to have a certain scope to call it Disneyland. And so with little like bird droppers, slowly, we were all like adding things, hoping that this thing could be called a Disneyland. And at some point, they decided they were going to call it Disneyland. Actually, that point was before I started. It was already Hong Kong Disneyland when I started. It had just been decided. And I guess that's why maybe Marty selected me, because I had the Disneyland DNA, perhaps. So there was no river in Adventureland. There was no Frontierland, and there was no river in Adventureland. There was no Jungle Cruise. It was the Temple of Peril and the Legend of the Lion King show, which had opened up recently at Walt Disney World, and some things. And then Fantasyland had the castle, but it didn't have any of the castle attractions. It had Toontown behind it.
Oh.
Huh.
And Tomorrowland, I'm trying to remember. I think there was Tomorrowland because we'd put Buzz Lightyear in it. And someone only wanted new things in it. So Fantasyland would have the PhilharMagic, and It's a Small World. Not Snow White, Pinocchio, Peter Pan, or Mr. Toad. Well, I can understand Mr. Toad, maybe, although that's my favorite of the dark rides. But
Yeah.
The other films had been at least released in Hong Kong, so it wasn't that they weren't familiar with especially Peter Pan being a British story, and Hong Kong having been a British colony. There were so many expats living there, so and it's such a popular attraction. But they decided, no, it'll be Winnie the Pooh, which was fine, and then Toontown, which made no sense. So John and I had some work to do to kind of pull that together. And since the the kind of the buzzword du jour was, this will be, Walt's Disneyland. We're going back to our roots. And that's why we're going back to the original Main Street and the original castle. And I'm sure that the budget had something to do with that, but I was okay with all of that. So, and then someone proposed Space Mountain, which was a great idea, because that is a staple attraction. But this was like one of the influencers that wouldn't typically have been an influencer, said, but we're doing Rock and Roller Coaster. So can we just do Rock and Roller Coaster and call it Space Mountain?
Ooh.
Oh gosh.
Ooh.
So again, kind of this weird, logic that you didn't want to be disrespectful to, but like, oh boy, how do you explain? Space Mountain's got to be Space Mountain. I guess you could use the Rock and Roller track, but now you're going to have to make the mountain different, and that's a new design. And I heard that we didn't want to do new designs. And so the suggestion was, we'll do Rock and Roller Coaster and just paint Space Mountain on the four sides. And I'm about ready to give up. That was one of the trying moments, So but we moved ahead, and I had really good support from Wing Chow, who also understands traditional Disney, or, it's not that it's traditional, it's the spirit of Disney, I guess. It's knowing where to innovate and knowing where to bring back something old and bring back something blue and borrowed and all of that.
Right.
Something old, new, borrowed, and blue. It's knowing, how to orchestrate all of that and not just say, we only want new things. So then you propose new things, and then they say, we can't afford all that new design. And you put new things in old designs. Some of my colleagues will, understand all of this. It gets better, believe me. This is the nadir of the company,
Right.
of the time period, and it's not Imagineering. It's people that are at the time kind of controlling Imagineering, I guess.
Right.
So we just had a lot of, like DisneyQuest, we went around and around a lot till we finally settled on the menu. And then John DeSantis and I went to work on Pressler, who I found to be reasonable when we would go in there and propose that we need to have Space Mountain, and it needs to be Space Mountain. And if we're going to call this attraction around the Adventureland River a jungle cruise, then there's a certain level of entertainment value that has to be in that. It can't just be a boat going around a river and there's an elephant somewhere. Mm-hmm. We've got to have, there's a certain number of those things that make it, memorable and make it worth coming back to. And I think we got just about everything. We went in twice with increased scope proposals, and he now I think we should have asked for more, of course, but I don't know if he had more to give because he was under. This was, again, it was the era of the strategic planning, so even the head of Parks and Resorts couldn't make their own decisions about their future. Mm-hmm. They could weigh in, and they had a heavy vote, but it was strategic planning that was kind of guiding this. And so I had a really good team. We had a really good team with Lori Coltrane and Kelly Ford and Skip Lang and Tim Delaney. I mean, you couldn't have done the Tomorrowland. That was his vision entirely. And one of the best stylistically, I think, that we ever did. It's not retro, although there are some little, accents of it here and there. But it was an all new look. And so, we were in some areas we had to do something entirely new, like Tomorrowland, and other areas, we had to kind of balance that. New spending, I guess, or extra spending for all new stuff with, off the shelf, I guess you'd say, entertainment like like Winnie the Pooh at the time, and the Jungle Cruise, because the molds for all of those animals exist, and the designs for the boat and everything, and we had Tarzan's Treehouse, and a new thing called Fantasy Gardens. And, and then like Disneyland Paris, we had to work fast to add things once the park opened. Right. But we eventually opened it, and I think it's one of the most beautiful parks. I mean, it is what's there. I just always argued it needed to be more. And I always felt like they must think I'm the typical design diva who always wants more. And all I was trying to do was explain to them that the scope of this is not equivalent to the scope of Disneyland, even in 1965.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think they just didn't believe me, and I didn't have the resources to be able to show them otherwise. So it's a little, I hope I'm not sounding like, sour grapesish or anything, but it was just.
No, I mean, I think
you know, to know that, okay, I know what a 6 hour or a 7 hour or an 8 hour experience is. And so does everyone else who's gone to Disneyland twice. And I know that this is a park that you can do effectively in 5 or 6 hours and see the whole thing. And you can't have a park where you see the whole thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And but the thinking was, well, why would you create anything extra other than what you see? And again, oh my God, you know, these are MBAs that I'm talking to. They are, you know, in principle, smarter than I am in theory, yet they don't get this business.
Right.
And so it was hard, you know, conveying all of that. And sure enough, you know, we opened and people loved it, but said, okay, we've seen it. And so we had to scramble to open up new things.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think your opinion has been borne out by the fact that since it opened, there's been a constant drive to expand and add things. And they're doing that right now as well.
Yeah.
And as you said, you know, you took a budget, your team took a budget that was insufficient, but managed to make a park. I have not been, but everybody I know says it's just an absolutely gorgeous park.
Yeah. Every square inch of what was created is as good as Disneyland, in some cases better, you know. But it has that Disneyland sense of intimacy and scale. What it didn't have on opening day was a sense of exploration and discovery, of wondering what's, you know, coming up to a choice of 2 or 3 ways to go. And I wonder what's on the left. Well, let's check out what's on the right. It was kind of a clockwise or counterclockwise journey that you'd take, and you'd see everything. And, you know, I didn't know what argument to use with MBAs about that, you know, why that doesn't work. You know, it's not part of the magic. It's not part of the DNA. And so fortunately, you know, it wasn't long after the opening that Bob Iger took charge of the company and dissolved that strategic planning group.
Mm-hmm. That was a happy day for
That
everyone.
was happy, I guess. I mean, a lot of those guys I knew and, you know, appreciated or liked, but as a group, they were formidable, and it was just little old me, you know, saying, I think my feet should be sore at the end of the day, you know. Why would you want your feet sore at the end of the day? Well, because it meant that I was there for 8 hours, not 3 or 4.
Right.
So, so bye-bye strategic planning.
Yeah. Well, in Hong Kong, were there any special considerations that you had to put into building in such a unique, it was a unique physical environment, it was a unique cultural environment. What was different about building there than in the other places that you've built?
Well, similar to Paris, there's so many things that are the same, and then there's just enough things that are different to throw you off, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, weather is a huge consideration out there. So if you think it rains in Florida, I have news for you. It does rain in Florida, but it rains like 3 times as much in Hong Kong. And it can also have these, 8 inches in 2 hours kinds of scenarios where it dumps. And the whole city is engineered to take these huge rain dumps. So as you drive around, you see all of these culverts that are cut into the landscape and hillsides, and you don't realize underneath you are huge, drainage culverts. And what's amazing is I watched when there was a monsoon warning, and one came in and did this just giant dump, and everyone stay in your houses and everything. And I could see through the windows just these waterfalls everywhere. They're organized waterfalls, which is what's amazing. Sometimes you can kind of tell because there'll be a concrete kind of a containment or culvert. But other times it's just wild water on rocks, but it's all controlled. It's all managed. And an hour later you go out and everything's dry. The sun's come out and there's no flood anywhere. Here in Southern California, it rains an inch and it's like a disaster.
Yeah,
Everyone's running into everything. The freeways got water, So there was that just kind of civil engineering thing to keep in mind. And, but in terms of taste and, when I left the project, we were still kind of in the state of discovery, really understanding and discovering what people prefer and what they don't, or what they don't like. Because you get kind of you can get a different audience the first year or two, and then it settles into kind of another audience, especially if you're trying to attract more people from the mainland. But my recollection is that we were concerned that I heard they wouldn't eat chocolate or candy, that, instead we had to have a mooncake shop instead of a candy shop. They weren't big on pastries. They don't like to sit next to each other. They don't like to be scared. They won't participate in an audience participation moment in a stage show or along the parade route. All of that was dispelled pretty quickly after we opened. Now, maybe that was more of a Hong Kong and expat audience at the time. But I remember thinking, why did we go to all the trouble to do this and that in some of the areas? Because basically people are the same, but yes, there are some nuanced differences. And we also, here's where it's kind of, important to have some historical experience, I guess, or mileage behind your belt, because there was this paranoia right after we opened that people weren't going on Space Mountain, they weren't going in PhilharMagic and other attractions that you couldn't tell what the attraction was by looking at it. So, where have we had this problem before? Walt Disney World with Space Mountain, Disneyland with Space Mountain. I don't know if we had the problem in Paris because we had the big cannon on the outside of it. But, people they weren't understanding it was a roller coaster. And, so some people who were getting sick or whatever, no one was getting hurt, but, the people who didn't know that it was a roller coaster in the dark fundamentally, and they'd come off sick and they'd complain. Or they didn't know what it was entirely. There wasn't a very long line for it until, you have to give it a couple of years. I remember I was at Disney World on opening day, and I remember no line. Well, there was no line for hardly anything except the Skyway had a big line because everyone could see it. Oh, we want to go on that. So it was actually a line for the Skyway. And the second time I went there, I remember noting that I'm still pretty much walking onto the Haunted Mansion, maybe waiting 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but there is now a half an hour line for the Skyway. And that happened in Paris too. So a big line for the treehouse. Everyone could see the treehouse and they could see people going into the treehouse, but no line for Pirates. Well, part of the problem is Pirates has 3 or 4 times the capacity as the treehouse. But I remember hearing the complaint, about people don't know what's inside of these shows. Well, that's a Disney differentiator. That's a good thing because it means we're not building big, ugly roller coasters all the time. I'm not against kinetics. Right. I love kinetics, but I'm just saying, give it a year or two and people on their second visit will know what it is. But that first year or two, people are trying to get used to the park. They don't know what's in it. They don't know what these things are. And, don't panic about, believe me, people are going to wait. You'll have lines for the roller coaster. Don't worry.
Yeah. It has to work its way into the culture.
Exactly.
To understand what these things are.
So that's some of the Hong Kong story.
That makes me. I was going to ask you a question about, since you worked on, Disneyland Paris is such a different beast than Hong Kong, and you spoke some of it with Space Mountain. How do you approach that variability between attractions? You set the menu and you say, "Well, I want a Space Mountain," or I mean, especially a Jungle Cruise is a great example in Hong Kong of like, we're going to do Jungle Cruise. What does that mean? How do you adapt it, but keep the core of what it is in your mind? I mean, what is the rubric for you of that kind of thing?
I hate to say it, but it's just kind of an intuition. I mean, there's a way to
Right.
to use metrics to help you make these decisions. Um, but the metric people will tell you, yes, you should use metrics, not emotion and not, personal opinion. And yet, a lot of the metrics people are using their personal opinions,
Right.
because
Yep.
there is a zone of kind of a gray zone of the unknown in every one of these. So it's not science and it's not art. It's somewhere in between the two, and it's has become a very long process now of determining what the menu is, with lots and lots and lots of people and their opinions involved. And so it's not as fun as, sitting around, hey guys, let's, what would you like to see? What would you like to see?
Right.
That, which was Disneyland Paris, basically, with the operators' approval, because the operators had, the background and the knowledge to know, a stinker from a winner, and or how, a stinker could be changed to become a winner.
That's interesting.
So,
Yeah.
so it was not a long process on Paris. I mean, there's always a little bit of change, last minute ads and things like that. But every project I worked on subsequent to that, the menu became a long, long, arduous process with seemingly no real science, I guess, to help you decide.
Is that like a corporate structure thing?
Well, everyone gets a vote now. It's part of the issue. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. All these kind of new ways of doing business are double-edged swords. And so there's good things about that, and then there's, not good things about that. So I just know that we have access to all of the metric data about the attractions, the utilization and capacities and performance and maintenance costs and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's like creating a 4-course meal, I guess. It's the gestalt of the whole of what you're offering, not any one particular thing. It's the overall offering, because it'd be easy to come up with what you think is a good variety of attractions, a good offering, and then realize someone will bring up, yeah, but these are all thrill attractions, or these are all kiddie attractions, or these are all attractions that only appeal to guys, or and you look at it, suddenly you go, oh, yeah, you're kind of right about that. So you make some adjustments. But it is difficult. It's even kind of, it's so funny, the kind of how things have changed with the IP idea and everything, because years ago we would love to have IP, and we were trying to get any IP. And now it's not that it's IP, it's that, again, you kind of go through some funny arguments about, I'm trying to remember. Well, even Mulan, to me, it was kind of like, why aren't we doing, a Mulan anything? And
Right.
some weird reason comes up that you kind of discover may not really be. Maybe it wasn't thought out all the way. Maybe because there was an issue in China doesn't mean that there's going to be an issue in Hong Kong. You also have to look at things like how did a film do post, post opening or post its first run? How is it doing? How is it selling through in merchandise, DVDs, all of that? Is there, if you see, a sweep up, that means that people really like it, despite the fact that they may not have seen it, or that they had mixed emotions about it, or they liked it but didn't want to see it a second time. For some reason, they're liking it more over time. So you have to look at those aspects too. And it's just funny, it can become very frustrating because the hot thing that you got to rush to do in 2 years, they're going, well, why are we doing this when we have this other hot thing?
Yeah, right.
The danger.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, before we leave Hong Kong, for American audiences who may not know the park very well, what are some elements of it that you're especially proud of?
Well, the most important thing to do to get a park on opening day is get the environment and the place itself, a place that you want to return to. If it doesn't have that thing that you imagine in your head when you're having a bad day, or, your dreary everyday office life or whatever it may be, and you're just dreaming of, escape, it's got to be more than a rocket ride through outer space, at high speed. It's got to be more than blasting Martians and space aliens with a laser gun. And it's got to be more than, hippos. Those are all important elements, but it's the place where you're going to talk with your friends at lunch, and, it's the parade. It's all of these different things. But you've got to get the space and the place, because that you're going out of your way to go to an extraordinary place. And you could actually build a really extraordinary attraction in an ordinary place. You could put Buzz Lightyear in a mall. Mm-hmm. You could put Space Mountain in a big box building when Best Buy's goes out of business. So it's the place. I think of this restaurant in Adventureland that Skip Lang and his team worked on. That's just, it's actually the kind of the bazaar at Adventureland, but turned into a restaurant, but not exactly the bazaar. And it's the landscape and the foliage, and when you're sitting there, you do not feel like, where you are. You totally feel like you're in another place. And that's what's so important to get at the opening. And that's what we didn't get for that Paris studio. It was not an extraordinary place. It had really good attractions, has really good attractions, and it's becoming an extraordinary place. But it wasn't an extraordinary place when it opened. And there were parts of California Adventure that were not an extraordinary place. So you got to get the extraordinary place part of it right. And then, of course, you have to have, if you're charging admission, which you are, you do have to have a certain amount of, attraction, entertainment business going on. But I'm really proud of, the base park that we opened up there. And, despite some formidable odds, the lighting is beautiful everywhere. I remember just walking around that park at night a month or two before opening, and as lights would come on, on board, they'd, finish up this area and that area. It would be exciting every night to see which new area, will be lit up for the first time. Tomorrowland is incredible at night, just beautiful with neon and just rich lighting. And even the castle had, richer lighting than anyone could do up to that time, because this was finally when LEDs could be used as a theatrical lighting source,
Mm-hmm.
not as a utilitarian, kind of a thing. And I remember my ears pricked up when I heard we're going to use LEDs to light the castle, until the lighting designer, took me out and showed me, and I was extremely comfortable with, like, wow, this is going to be beautiful. All the beautiful tertiary colors, and you could program it to change slowly, over the night. That's wonderful. Main Street was beautiful. I can't think of an area that, I would groan walking past or,
Yeah.
or going into. So everything that was done superbly. And we just needed more, and now there's more.
Yes, that's great.
Joe Lancistro did a really great job after me, with Grizzly Mine, and of course the attraction whose name I can't remember, along with the theater in Hollywood.
Oh, Mystic
Manor.
Yeah.
Okay, tomorrow I'm going to go see the doctor.
Well, before we want to ask about your book, but before we do, your book project, your massive book project, before we do, you've done a lot of presentations, you've done a lot of podcasts, you've talked about your career a lot. Is there any project of yours you don't get asked about that you'd like to draw attention to?
Well, people don't know I worked on Splash Mountain, and people don't know I worked on DisneyQuest, and most people don't know I worked on Rock and Roller Coaster. Not the finished result, but the proposal for it, getting it kind of to its first concept meeting. I don't know, there's something in there. I worked on Walt Disney World. I was the art director for Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom for several years, between 88 and 91 or 92. And so a lot of the changes that you saw happen in that park, like the new color schemes for Fantasyland around 1990. And I had this, I couldn't, I had this thing about the concrete benches that were in Adventureland that looked like the concrete benches that were in Tomorrowland. So I had a thing about that. So and Eisner agreed. And we had this walkthrough with Michael, and I don't think Frank was on that, but it was with Michael and with Sully. And the things that he was like picking up on was like amazing. And there were a lot of the things that were in my head that I'm like, I don't know if this bothers anyone besides me. But there was some ugly lighting, and I write it off to, the last month or two in 1971 where they were in a hurry and they needed to get things done. And then you open it and then everyone loves it. And there's really not incentive to go back and fix some of those things, because why?
Mm-hmm.
But Michael wanted to change some of those. So we came up with this big punch list of things. And so I'm trying to, probably no one knows that I designed the big toll plaza, the main toll plaza going to the Magic Kingdom, when they redid that in 1990.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Wow. All right. Well,
yeah, it was the final drawings for it were done by iTech, but I did the concept and the colors for it and did the approval of it. And so that's kind of funny. No one associates me with generally with Walt Disney World stuff, unless it's Epcot, Imagination.
Right.
But whatever those aesthetic improvements that were made in the late 80s and early 90s, I worked on those.
Very cool. Interesting. Yeah.
We need to talk about this WED history you're working on. It seems like several projects now. You kind of had the archaeology stuff, but one of the ones you're working on is a book about the kind of hidden figures of WED, if you will, the people who don't get as much credit. And I'm so glad you're working on this, because, so many people get, there's just a few names that get thrown around over and over again, but so many people that worked on these things. Was there one particular Imagineer that started you down this path to be more interested in this, or is it more your experience?
No, it's a very circuitous tale about how I got to this particular book because I was proposing another and doing research for another idea that was archaeology, Disneyland kind of based, which I'm still hoping to do at some point. But in the course of researching that, came across, started discovering untold WED history, basically, or forgotten history, and thought, you know what? I might be the only person that could connect some of these dots, with the few names that I recognize, and but with the knowledge of some of the earlier projects and some of the earlier things. The Archaeology of Disneyland book was put on hold, and I was asked by another publisher to look at the archaeology of New Orleans Square, just that. So I'm at the archives, I'm researching that, but I keep coming up with new names and new revelations about people who are working on certain things. And I just thought, you know what? Someone needs to get into the old history of WED. I just realized what had happened, really, was that WED moved to Glendale in 1961 and basically shifted staff somewhat. So the original Imagineers who were at the studio were 90% draftsmen or sketch artists. And the draftsmen and sketch artists were also being borrowed by the live action film group, the live action film art department, which was new at the studio. It was only formed in like 1957. So the first films, minus 20,000 Leagues, but sort of 20,000 Leagues, the first sets that were done for Disney films and Disney TV shows were done by Imagineers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The backlot was designed by Disney Imagineers. And then they brought over a professional film art director. There already were very skilled art directors there, like Marvin Davis. Well, I'm reading all of this stuff. It's suddenly a light bulb goes off in my head that all of the people that I've ever asked questions about the early days of WED were never in the early days of WED. They were at WED beginning in 1961 or 62 when it was in Glendale. Now, I didn't ask the right people. I should have asked. I never had a conversation like this with John Hench or with Claude. And it may not have made much of a difference because I'm finding out kind of psychologically what happens in the human brain when you worked in one location for a little bit and then moved over to another location and you worked in that location 4 times longer than you worked in the first location. It's just like magnetic tape. You overwrite your earlier memories about who was there and what was there and where you were.
Right.
And so, I asked people before. I know I've asked people who were there, not maybe there the whole time, but might have been there for a year or two, like in 1959 or 1960. Where was the WED office, or where was WED located when it was at the studio? And I would get the same answer. There was no particular location. It was just, everyone had a different office in the animation building or in the machine shop or in the ink and paint building. And everything was, they made some stuff in the machine shop and some other stuff on some of the sound stages, but it was not really an organized thing or place. And that's wrong. There was an office and it was centralized. And there was a dedicated staff, and there was kind of an elastic staff that went back and forth between the films. But there's a very definite early history of WED that just seems to have been forgotten. So if you go back to those people with that information, they go, oh, yeah. So you can't kind of rely on just cold asking,
Right.
questions like that. So I'm discovering, this is just becoming clearer and clearer with every visit to the archives and every additional dive, that no one has really documented the early days, meaning that, when they were at the studio, but also between then and the opening of Walt Disney World. Actually, even between then and the advent of internal newsletters that document, things, events, people. So the memory, basically up to about 76, is really dodgy. You could ask 6 different Imagineers who were there at the time, and you'll get 6 different answers. And you don't get clarity until the newsletters kind of show up. I'm not taking it to 76 or 77. I'm taking it to 71. So there's a lot of anecdotal stories that you get and that you've heard over and over between 61 and 71. But not very many photos, or, where did these people sit? Who sat next to them? How did that whole interplay work? Did the office setup influence the way they worked or what they worked on? And so these are some of the things you can't get answers for. And I started seeing slowly, piece by piece, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, a whole different picture beginning to kind of develop in front of me, of almost like a lost Imagineering. Not so much once they were in Glendale, although quite a bit of that. There's virtually no photos inside the Sonora building, for example. Well, there are a lot of them. You just have to know where to look, and they don't belong to Disney. So, so the plot thickens, all this stuff. There's all these collections all across the country that have some of these photos or connect some of these dots that haven't been documented officially by Disney.
Yeah, that's been one of the interesting parts of, watching from a distance of you working on this over the last few years is, all the different archives you've been to, all the different places you've had to look, places you wouldn't think of to look for these things at first.
Yeah. And lots of places still too, except that I don't know if I will. I'm anxious to get the first volume out. And I think, that there's the possibility of, coming out with second and expanded printings, because this research could go on forever, for one thing. There's still folks around from that go back to 1954, 55, 56. They're still around. And, so if they left in 56, they don't remember much. Mm-hmm. It's a blur. But if they left in, 1960 or 61, their memory is a little bit better of some of the people and some of the things. And so there's still people to interview. I've got more than enough information at this point to fill the quota, I guess, if you will, of pages. But there's also the feeling that I should get it out because people may know some of these other people. Believe me, you're going to run into people who go, you know what, I'm related. I didn't, that's my uncle. He never told me that he worked at Imagineering, because it wasn't called Imagineering, for one thing. And, they thought that they were just grunt draftsmen for this amusement park. That was, literally what they thought they were doing. They were between films, or they were laid off at MGM or Fox. There's a lot of surprises, by the way. So, you hear about the 2 or 3 guys that came from Fox, and they each brought, 2 or 3 people from Fox. And those are the people. If you have deeper information about WED, that's what you believe, or you may believe. But what's told is that Walt went to his animators and to his set designers and backlot builders to design Disneyland. And that's not true. There was no backlot. There were no set designers, except the ones that were brought over by Harper Goff for 20,000 Leagues. And there was no set design department. There was no art department because they weren't making live action films except for 20,000 Leagues. Right. And they had made some other live action films in England before that, but there was, and occasionally there was a need to shoot something on a soundstage and bring in a set designer maybe for that brief moment in a package film or something. But other than that, they were not purveyors of live action films. So therefore there was no backlot. There was a big 10-acre strip of undeveloped land back there. And what happened was they hired Dick Irvine, and Dick hired Marvin Davis and Bill Martin, and they were from Fox. And they would hire, as they ramped up and staffed up, what they wanted were experienced draftspeople that had worked on film and new genres and period architecture. Well, the studios were laying people off during that era, if anything. So 20th Century Fox, I think, was downsizing, and MGM, I think, was going to a heavy downsizing, where basically they were just keeping the handful of art directors, and then everyone else was being laid off and would be brought back piecemeal for each project. And MGM actually had an outplacement service that would send people, when they were laid off from the art department after a film, they'd send them over to Imagineering.
Interesting.
To Disney. Yeah. So there were more people from MGM than there were from 20th Century Fox that first couple years of Imagineering. So there were quite a few kind of like aha moments where it's like, okay, and that was one of them, and the fact that the backlot at Disney was not designed, Disneyland was not designed by backlot designers. The backlot was designed by Disneyland designers who had backlot experience. But, the Western Street was done by a fairly young guy named Stan Jolly. And he was a draftsman for the first round at Disneyland, and then was identified as a keeper when Disneyland opened, and was starting to be groomed as an assistant art director. And he actually did all of the drawings of the buildings on Storybook Land after Ken Anderson had done his concept sketches. Then Stan Jolly was really kind of the show set designer / production designer. Fred Jurger built all of those, but someone had to figure out how to place all of those. And that's, was something a little bit probably beyond the model builder's job, is to know, you had to build foundations for each one of those buildings, and basically civil engineer, even though it's a miniature, miniature scenes, it had to be a lot of the same work that goes behind full-scale buildings had to go on behind those little buildings. They have utilities and water and all of that. Well, so he was like because Ken wasn't there every day, he was really the de facto art director on that. And he worked on a lot of early Disneyland projects, and then ended up doing film. And I think the last project he worked on was Caddyshack. He was the art director on Caddyshack.
Really?
There's a lot of that. There's a draftsman in there who's not there very long, and he becomes the art director on Back to the Future.
Wow.
And of course, there's Dean Tavoularis. That's the biggest one of all. And he started as an apprentice. But there's another one I found named James Claytor. He was also a young apprentice, and he went on to be the head art director at Paramount for the TV shows, and did all of our favorite TV shows in the 70s, 60s and 70s. Yeah. And designed the Paramount Ranch out here in the hills here. And
it's just remarkable to me.
There's a lot. I mean, almost every draftsman was either someone who was a veteran and had worked on Wizard of Oz and all these films of the past, and they were in their retirement years, nearing retirement, or they were up and coming apprentices that would go on to big things.
It's just so interesting to me that despite the years and years of like scholarship that's gone into Disney history and these things, there's so much remains unexplored. Like you've tapped into a really rich vein of foundational undocumented history here.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably been a trend in the past that is hopefully changing with the younger, newer authors to not accept the packet of information that's first plopped down before you. When you first do your research, you've got to look in the places that are unexpected, or kind of use a little bit of detective intuition to think about where something, what could be in this folder, this file, this photo book that there's no clue whatsoever on the binder that it might be in there. And I started kind of getting into the groove of sniffing that out, of like, okay, there's nothing here that tells me there's anything related to WED or Disneyland in here yet. Now I know there's probably going to be something in this book about it, because Walt liked to take his all of his VIPs around. So there are either personally or have someone take them. This would be a movie star or a winner of a dog food contest. And and they're taken around the studio, and there's usually, there's a photographer. If they're interesting enough, there's a photographer with them. And they go to, they do the thing where they see the animators, they see the storyboard, they go to ink and paint, all of the Mr. Geographic stuff is really the tour. But they would also take them into the WED office, not all the time, but sometimes. And so there's pictures of people who you don't know, that in an office space that unless you knew, unless you could tell by something that's on the wall, you wouldn't know that that's WED. It doesn't say WED Enterprises, it doesn't say Disneyland, it doesn't say Design Office, it doesn't say anything. And yet here it is in this book. And so there was a lot of stuff in those, that was one kind of vein. Construction drawings are another vein, and collections at other libraries are another vein. And, and there's just these weird circuitous, the George Harrell photo collection, that means nothing to me. That's a collection that's over at USC in the special collections. George Harrell. Who the hell is George Harrell? George Harrell was Walt Disney's personal photographer for a long time. He was a famous photographer, famous Hollywood glamour photographer. Shot beautiful black and whites of all of the stars back in the day. And he also shot, some Walt Disney photos, mostly in the 40s, in the 50s. So why would there be anything WED related, in that? Well, for one thing, he was related to Walt circuitously through.
Oh, wow.
Lily's niece, Phyllis, was married to George Harrell.
Holy smokes. Okay.
So that's probably why Walt used him as his personal photographer, besides the fact that he was a great photographer. But he also comes back from time to time to shoot, just kind of candid shots around the studio. And so he has shot a lot of the shots that you see, that you've seen of Walt around the early 60s. I think in Chris Merritt's book, he probably has a few shots of the dinosaurs being, things like the dinosaurs being built. And But he usually owned his photographs, and then the studio would have to buy or indicate the photos that they wanted to keep. So, and this is the case with, in a lot of situations, is you've seen the subset, you haven't seen the entire set of photos. So at at some of these collections and some of these university libraries, you'll find the other photos that you haven't seen. And the other photos, you can kind of understand sometimes that, these are not the hero shots, but they're the shots that show what the interior of the space looked like. Or sometimes, you see a little clue of something in the corner, being built or whatever. And so there ended up being quite a bit of information between these 5 or 6 universities that I have visited in their collections, enough to connect dots. Let me put it that way. And one thing that I'm doing is if I'm not sure of the information, if I'm not able to kind of corroborate it via more than one, if I'm not able to verify it by using 2 or 3 different sources, then I'm going to say it appears, or I'll qualify the discovery. I'm not going to say this is fact unless I've got okay, it's in the phone book. This person's in the phone book. There's a photo of this person there. Right. He has signed a drawing here. So, I would not have believed that about Dean Tavoularis, except I did interview him, so that helped. But if he had not been alive, and if I had not, seen his name in all the phone directories, and then also seen them on all these Disneyland drawings that he had done, I would not have believed that he had worked as much on it, because my boss, George Windrum, worked side by side with him in the 50s. And he also kind of gave me the impression that, he wasn't there. He worked on a few things, but George left, my boss left. So, and then came back in 1963. And then Dean Tavoularis decided to stay back at the studio to work on film. So I would have been under the impression, just going by one point of view, that Dean was there, but only worked on Disneyland projects for a couple of years. Not, he worked on almost every Disneyland project after it opened, as one of the lead set designers, if you will, under working under an art director.
That's wild.
Up through 1962 at least. So even after Wed left and went to Glendale, Dean was working on the Haunted Mansion building, the structure, the mansion shell building itself, with Marvin Davis. And if you see, next time you watch Mary Poppins, look at the 2 art directors on it, who are Carol Clark and William Tuntke. They were Imagineers.
Oh, okay.
William Tuntke was also being groomed to be an assistant art director, and he became an art director. And Carol Clark was an old veteran going way back. He had already won an Oscar. And he was the one that Walt identified to be the head art director for the studio, for the films. But even Carol Clark would be borrowed to work on Haunted Mansion. He did layouts for the walkthrough version of the Haunted Mansion. He also designed the big drum in the parade in 1962.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah. Just, talk about range.
Yeah, really.
Right.
Yeah. And he designed the walkthrough for the Babes in Toyland. He and Bill Tunkey worked on the Babes in Toyland walkthrough in the Opera House.
Oh, that's wild.
So it's just very interesting. All these things that you didn't know. I sure as heck didn't know any of this.
No.
And I really think it's that when you move a location, like I think back at Disneyland Paris, and all I remember is my last office. I can't really remember the iteration. I kind of remember the first office, and I definitely remember the last office, but all the iterations in between and the people in between, I don't remember.
Yeah, it just kind of
You know, if
blurs
I was
together.
reminded, I would, yeah. But if people are asking me, questions about them, I would like go, I'm sorry, I don't remember that.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating project, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. And I know a lot of other people are too. Before we go, I've got 2 questions. We throw the floor open to our Patreon backers, and I have 2 quick questions from Alan today. Number 1, he wants to know, what is the biggest misconception or legend about WED that needs to be busted?
Well, I think it's that first one that I mentioned, that because I think it's in the benefit, to the benefit of WED, that Imagineers designed the first 2 backlots anyway. The Zorro sets were primarily designed by Marvin Davis, the same man who laid out Disneyland. And the Western Street was primarily designed by Stan Jolly, who had 4 years of Disneyland WED work behind his belt before he went over to design the Western Street on the backlot. So you always hear that Walt turned to his set designers and backlot designers and animators to be the people to design Disneyland, to be the first WED Imagineers, when the fact is actually maybe 4 animators or 5 animators. And then, the machine shop people there in the machine shop. And then the rest all came from other studios because there was no art department at Disney at the time. And it wasn't just 20th Century Fox, and it wasn't just MGM, it was Warner Brothers. And there was someone from Desilu, and someone from a local radio station, and someone from a local TV station. And what they had in common was even if they were licensed architects, if they were a licensed architect, probably what had happened was that they, during the Depression, they had no business. And so the only need for architects in this area was at the studios, and it was a big need. So if you were a good architect, you went to a studio, and you helped, design the backlots or whatever. And then some of them went back to their private practice, and some of them stayed in film. The second one would be that the castle at Disneyland, like the castle at Walt Disney World, had a major player that you've never heard of before behind the design of it. And not to take anything away from Herb Ryman, whose talents are immeasurable, but I think even Herb would tell you the story. I mean, he kind of has told the story in a way, that he didn't think it should look so much like Neuschwanstein. That people would, as a travel industry, and people began traveling more and further away, people were going to end up going to Neuschwanstein and coming back to LA going, why did Walt build a copy of Neuschwanstein?
Right.
So, and Herbie, was a big part of moving the main roof 180 degrees around. So, I mean, there's a lot of myth busting, just starting with the castle. No, it is not designed after Neuschwanstein. There is a major roof facade and one turret that is evocative of Neuschwanstein and has some stolen little, or lifted or inspired details on it. But that's just the main tower and one side of one roof. The rest of it is primarily a Loire Valley castle. Mm-hmm. And the architect on that was a guy named Roland Hill, who was an architect thrown out of business by the Depression and thrown into the film set design. Oh. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then brought over by Harper Goff to work on 20,000 Leagues. And he did the set designs for the parlor, for the, beautiful, main room in the Nautilus. But even weirder than that, the story gets weirder. Walt Disney was in the war with Roland Hill, with this guy. They were both drivers.
Whoa.
And Roland Hill became friends. And while they were out there, Walt noticed that Roland Hill was always sketching all these monuments and old Gothic, cathedrals and buildings and castles. And so that was in Walt's head. And I guess they remained friends because Walt went back to the United States after the war, and Roland Hill stayed out there and went to university out there in both Paris and I think in Spain, if I have my information right, and got his architecture degree there, then came back to Hollywood and opened up an architecture business on Hollywood Boulevard in the late 20s, early 30s, and designed a few homes, one of which was just for sale that you could buy here. And then the Depression hit and he went to Warner Brothers, I believe. Oh, but before he went, or maybe when he was freelancing with the studios, Disney remembered him because they were working on Snow White. And this is the first film that's, besides The Old Mill, which had just come out before, this film was going for a certain, not photorealism, but it was going for a higher degree of sophistication and realism than they had ever done. And they had never really, done a castle in any of the cartoons other than just something that's off in the distance. Mm-hmm. So now they need a sense of authentic placemaking. And who do they get? They get Roland Hill to do the concepts for Snow White's castle.
Wow.
And then he goes back, and he goes to Warner Brothers, and he's there at Warner Brothers until he goes to Disney to work on 20,000 Leagues. And then someone probably remembers his portfolio. Maybe it's Walt. Who knows who it was? Maybe it's Dick Irvine. But anyway, he ends up being the architect on the castle. And wow. A lot of the design was done by Marvin Davis previously. I would say he did the bulk of the design. But in order to dial down the Neuschwanstein and dial up the Loire Valley, that's what Roland Hill apparently brought to the table on that. And did a lot of the hero pieces on that castle, but he was the one who kind of had to supervise it and bring it all together and make suggestions about all the little details that that you'd find in a real medieval castle like that.
Wow. Well, you may have just answered Alan's second question. His second question was what story or person should be known more but isn't, and I think that certainly qualifies as well.
No, there's more.
Yeah.
Sam Hamill.
Okay.
Jacob Samuel Hamill.
Okay.
I think is the one to me that is turning out to be kind of the most interesting. I mean, Dean Tavoularis is too, and certainly Roland Hill, and certainly Ted Rich, who designed the castle in Florida. But Sam Hamill is this superhuman person that we've never heard of, except he does have a window on Main Street.
Oh, okay. And
Sam Hamill, I'm dying to really know more about him. You could Google him, and it's a tough Google. Not a lot comes up at first, so you have to kind of Google around. But part of the problem is he's always J.S. Hamill, or sometimes he's Jacob S. Hamill. But when he's at Disney, he's Sam Hamill. So it's almost like there's two different people. But he's not on the payroll. But he's with Disney until 1971 consistently. He is a engineer. They're looking for an engineer for Disneyland. Seems like that would be a good thing to have. An engineer. We need an engineer. We've got one for structural. They're the structural engineers for the last soundstage that they built at the Disney studio becomes the structural engineer for Disneyland, and they're good. They're really good. Wheeler and Gray, you might have heard of them. Mm-hmm. And so that's good. We got a structural engineer, but we still need a mechanical engineer. We need an electrical engineer. We need a lighting designer. We need someone who knows these. We have waterfalls and a waterway system in the park. And so they have a connection to this place in Ohio called Nella Park or Nela Park. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I'd never heard of it before. And Nela Park is where light bulbs are invented.
Oh,
did you know that?
Okay.
All light bulbs, probably through the 70s or 80s, came from Nela Park, General Electric's industrial park.
Wow.
That was some Edison connection. And so everything from the carbon arc light to the Christmas light was developed and prototyped and tested at Nela Park.
Okay.
And so Disney had a connection somehow, or they knew about Nela Park, probably through film projection and that sort of thing. Probably Ub Iwerks, had a connection to Nela Park. So they go to Nela Park. They call Nela Park to the top. They go to the top R&D guy. Do you have any recommendations for a lighting guy for Disneyland, for our little Disneyland project? And the guy goes, I've got a guy who can not only do your lighting design, he can do all of your electrical, he can do your mechanical, he can do your little waterfalls, he can do your big waterfalls, he can do your air conditioning and heating and all of that. He's a brilliant guy. His name is Jacob Samuel Hamill. And he's there in Los Angeles. So they bring him in, and this guy's got this incredible, already by that time, where he has an incredible resume. He's a very kind of like conservative, horn-rimmed glasses, no nonsense kind of guy. He's like kind of like Bob Matheson, but Bob Matheson always had a smile, and this guy's like very like, meh, he probably smiled too, but the pictures, he's very serious. And, he should be. He's a licensed engineer. And before this, he gets out of engineering school, and his first job is a big job. He designs this, or helps design and does the layout and does the electrical for Jones Beach in New York, which again, I don't know what Jones Beach is, but I read about it. I'm like, oh, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. Everyone in New York knows what Jones Beach is. And it's this, kind of day resort kind of a place that it's more than just a beach. It's got little pavilions and things in it and architecture. And so it's a big deal. And he does that with, what's his name? What's his name? Moses, Robert Moses.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Robert Moses is just this up and coming guy. And so is Jacob Samuel Hamill, for that matter. And they do Jones Beach. Oh. And then Moses remembers him in 1939 and says, can you come over here to this World's Fair that we're doing? We have a project for you. We need you to light the Perisphere and the Unisphere, or whatever it was called. What was it called?
The Trilon.
The Trilon and the Perisphere, because those are really tall. And how do you light them? So he does that. And then he moves to Los Angeles, and he does things, and then somehow gets onto this Disneyland project. And he works with Harper Goff to figure out how they're going to do Schweitzer Falls. And he works with Harper Goff again on the Jungle Cruise to figure out how we're going to keep boats on the track. How are we going to keep these boats? How are we going to make these boats where they can, have motors, but not drift off, but be able to unlink, and go backwards into off a spur, because that's the thing, right? And so, well, let me put it this way. It wasn't as easy. Like, I would just think that's an easy thing, but apparently it wasn't. So he invents the underwater bogie. And then he
Wow.
worked with Walt on the waterway system that circulates clockwise around the park. That it goes from the low point rivers of America, gets pumped up to Storybook Land, and then gets pumped to the Tomorrowland Lake at the time, and then down to the Castle Moat and across Frontierland and through Adventureland and back to the Jungle Cruise. He engineers that. Well, he's also the civil engineer for the whole park. He's he's the signature on all the civil engineering drawings that include which trees are going to get cut, and all the cut and fill within the park. Uh-huh. And even though he was capable of it, he had to hire another guy because of time to do all of the soil analysis and water analysis. And, because what kind of soil do you have to bring into this site in order to have anything except orange trees live in it? So he does that. Then he does all the lighting drawings for the park, and his company does all of the electrical plans and the HVAC. And then he's always on hand. He never joins the company, but he's so important that Walt moves him to 234 Buena Vista Street, the next block up, so that he's always right there. They can go to him, he could come to them, and drawings can be walked across the street back and forth with immediacy. That's how important he was. And in fact, I don't know this, but Disney might have even at the time subsidized the building of that building, because they do a custom building for him there on Buena Vista. And that's where his office remains for the rest of his practice. Wow. And then there's more, but he works on the Haunted Mansion stretching rooms. He works on the submarine, does a patent with Joe Fowler on the submarines. He's involved in every of course he's involved in the Rainbow Caverns.
Oh, yeah.
He's involved in almost every weird kind of, thing. Like, how do you do this? We need a special kind of engineer for this, but it's always Sam Hamill. It's always Wheeler and Gray for structural and Sam Hamill for just about everything else. And then in 1964, Moses brings him back to the World's Fair. And so I've got even more for you to do for this one. I want you to do the entire exterior area development lighting package.
Oh, wow.
For the fair and the Unisphere. So all the area lighting. And I recall you are very good with fountains and that sort of thing. So we have this big, big fountain called the Fountain of the Planets that's going to have fireworks and dancing waters and all this stuff. And Hamill designs that fountain and everything that goes along with it, including the audio animatronic style system of controls for it.
Wow.
Because it was run off of a tape or some combination of a master tape and what do you call those, data cards. Mm-hmm. So, he figures that all out. And he works on the Progress Land, and he works on, I don't know if he worked on the others, but I know he worked on Progress Land. Oh, man. So he was big. Sam Hamill. We've never heard of him.
Never heard of him, but you will. That's incredible. And so much more to uncover in the future,
and
I'm sure.
More.
And there's more.
Again, I always try to keep myself earthbound and grounded. It could just be us, 10 people who are interested.
But
we'll find out. Maybe 15.
We'll see. Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for this sort of magical mystery tour you've taken us on. Yes. It's been really incredible. And thank you so much for your time and for, the work you put in to uncover all this stuff. That wraps up our Progress City Town Hall with Tom K. Morris. Tom was very generous with his time, very generous, and we really thank him for taking part. Jeff, that was a lot of info to download.
Yeah, it's amazing. We took Tom's trip from the early 70s all the way through, almost to now. And then we go way back to the 50s. So I feel like I've been in a DeLorean just cruising all over the place. But yeah, like you said, we thank Tom for his time. Tom delayed dinner for us. He did all kinds of things. So we really do appreciate these interviews are just an incredible chance to find out all kinds of things that you would have never known. And Tom is so good at knowing what to throw in, even things that you have not asked about. So, because he is a historian himself.
He is, and just knows more off the top of his head than just about anybody I can think of. Yes. And it's, as someone who's bad with names and places, and I know where to look things up, but can't necessarily pull it off the top of my head. His ability to do so puts me in awe. So
respect.
Much respect. And I really, really can't wait for his book. It's going to be very exciting. So now that our Fantasyland escapades have come to an end, Jeff, where should we head next?
Well, now we're back at the hub. I'm going left, man. Just going left. And we're going to head to the wilds of Adventureland. A land that has a very interesting history at Walt Disney World, as you will find out if you listen to our episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like we've done things out of the natural order of things, because my inclination always is to turn left. Go to Adventureland, come down Main Street, go to Adventureland. So now we're finally making it over to Adventureland. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And we are only able to do that thanks to our Patreon members. Patreon has allowed us to do 4 episodes this month, which is very exciting. It also allows us to do our monthly live chat event where we do a slideshow related to that month's topic, have a little video maybe, whatever we can find that's interesting, and just have a little chat with our friends. And it's a lot of fun. So if you're interested in joining us and getting some other neat extras, just head to patreon.com/ProgressCityUSA. You can also find us at podcast@ProgressCityUSA.com. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think about the shows. If you have any questions, if you have any comments or memories, we'll do another mailbag one of these days. You can also find us online on Twitter. I'm at Progress City USA. Jeff is at Jeff G. Crawford. And you can get in touch with us there. Just let us hear. We're happy to listen to any feedback you might have. And of course, if you choose to give us a review on your podcast platform, we'd appreciate that too. Get the word out there. And so with that, any other thoughts before we leave the land of fantasy, Jeff?
I have enjoyed reliving my memories in Fantasyland and hearing about Tom's, trip as a youth. So I've really enjoyed this. Fantasyland is probably not my top choice of land I will go to first as a guest, but it's very, very special to me. So I've enjoyed it.
Right. It's really, I feel it's put me in touch with my Fantasyland roots, the memories of yesteryear.
Right. That's right.
And reminded me of a lot of things I haven't thought about in a while.
Exactly.
And that I really, really miss. A lot of things that I miss. So it's been fun. We hope you enjoyed it too. And we hope you'll join us next month for Adventureland. We'll take a true life adventure of our very, very own. So without further ado, from all of us to all of you, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.